To maybe give us a little bit of context, like how has that shifted? How has that process shifted, say over the last, say 5, maybe 10 years? How have things changed?
Yeah, so I would say there's a couple of things, right? First, shop boards continue to be there, right? And small businesses, as much as large organizations, everyone uses shop boards to post their positions, right? So that hasn't changed that much. However, what's changed in that sense is they enable large organizations to search for specific individuals. So, it used to be strategies for talent attraction used to be a lot of post and pray, right? You post a job, you pray the come, and that's that.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Welcome back to the Future Tech and Foresight podcast. I'm your AI host, Mark Verbenkoff's deepfake avatar, and this is episode number 211. Talent acquisition has changed dramatically over the past decade, shaped by globalization, remote work, and rapid advances in technology. In this episode, the conversation dives into how large enterprises structure their recruiting processes, how tools like applicant tracking systems and LinkedIn have reshaped hiring, and why recruiters today are expected to manage more complexity with fewer resources. The discussion expands into global hiring trends, with a particular focus on Latin America as a fast-growing talent market. From cultural nuances and language skills to infrastructure challenges and onboarding remote employees, the episode highlights what organizations often overlook when hiring internationally and why doing it right can unlock massive advantages for both companies and candidates. The episode also tackles the realities behind emerging technologies. While VR once promised to revolutionize remote collaboration and hiring experiences, its momentum has faded. In contrast, AI is already embedded across the talent acquisition lifecycle, raising important questions about fairness, efficiency, and how both recruiters and candidates can use these tools responsibly. The result is a forward-looking look at how hiring is evolving and what skills will matter most in the future. Now comes a little bit about the guest. Leon Cartelli is a talent acquisition leader and mentor with over 15 years of experience building high-performing recruiting teams across startups and global organizations. He specializes in connecting talent strategy directly to business growth, spanning executive search, employer branding, candidate experience, and talent development. Leon brings a practical, real-world perspective shaped by leading talent initiatives across Latin America, North America, and globally. Through his work, Leon continues to build and mentor the next generation of recruiting excellence in a rapidly evolving global talent market.
All right, Leon, thank you very much for coming onto the podcast today to talk about recruiting or talent acquisition, recruiting, and obviously, how that's going to be changing in the future. I'm interested to hear more. So thanks for taking the time to share your insights.
Thank you for having me, Mark. It's a conversation that I enjoy. I love. It's so much fun, and I think lately, everyone is talking about the future of whatever they're doing with so much change and transformation going on. So super excited for the conversation.
Great. Well, the way that I start off all my episodes with my guests here is getting a little bit of a sense of how you got involved in what you're doing. So if you could take, a minute or so and just give us a little bit of insight into how you got involved, that'd be great.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny, right? So I do talent acquisition, and 95% of the people I talk with that do talent acquisition, they started by coincidence. And it was a bit what happened to me, and then the love grew. So I started doing recruiting at Accenture. So I'm based out of Buenos Aires, Argentina, and Accenture was starting a hub in Buenos Aires to do recruiting for the entire world. And they were looking for Dutch-speaking individuals.
Dutch speaking.
Yes, Dutch.
Okay.
I did a student exchange program when I was 17 in the Netherlands. So I was probably one of the 10 people in Argentina that spoke Dutch. I say spoke Dutch because I don't speak Dutch anymore, unfortunately. But that's how I started at Accenture, doing recruiting for the Netherlands. And then my love grew. It was funny. I started liking it because I'm very process oriented. And for recruiting, you definitely need to be, very structured, very process oriented. It's a lot of what we do, even if people doesn't know that. And that's why I started liking it, in terms of the technology we use and how to optimize and enable the teams. And then from there, I started really loving the fact that you have a true impact in people and businesses, right? On the business side, we all know how the success lies on the talent that you have teams, and then on the people side, right? Just helping individuals find the next step in their career, grow and be able to accomplish what they've set up to do, and meet those aspirations and purposes in the workplace. That was really when it struck my heart, and it was, I won't say love at first sight, but
Right, right.
third time, right?
It grew on you. Okay, interesting. Um, maybe a good place to start here, like getting a little bit of context. So, for me personally, and I think it's similar for a number of people listening. Like I've only ever worked at small businesses or startups. I haven't done the large corporate business. So, like talent acquisition was always through referral, through you post something on LinkedIn and you get a couple responses and you interview some people. And I know that in larger corporations it's not done exactly like that. There's a significantly larger, more robust process to have that happen. Um, to maybe give us a little bit of context, like how has that shifted? How has that process shifted? I mean, you've been involved in this for several years. We're going to talk about AI and emerging technology in the future of it, but like say over the last say 5, maybe 10 years, how have things changed?
Yeah, so I would say there's a couple of things, right? First, shop boards continue to be there, right? And small businesses, as much as large organizations, everyone uses shop boards to post their positions, right? So that hasn't changed that much. However, what's changed in that sense is the fact that there's been I would say an expansion on the technology that those shop boards use to reach talent, and then in terms of how it's used for different talent segments, right? And so, and when I say shop board, I'm intentionally including LinkedIn.
Right.
LinkedIn is a social media, but it's also a shop board at the end of the day. However, what they've done and what others do is they enable large organizations to search for specific individuals. So, it used to be the strategies for talent attraction used to be a lot of post and pray, right? You post a job, you pray the come, and that's that. Over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of um, technology or um, capabilities added to these platforms that enable organizations to really be very specific and very granular in terms of what they want. So, for example,
Mm.
you still post a job, but the technology behind LinkedIn or let's say Monster or Indeed, it's going to put that job in front of the right individuals that have
Mm.
experience and the skills that you're looking for. The other thing that they've continued to optimize and improve is on the filters to look for those individuals, right? So a lot of people doesn't know this, but there is LinkedIn products for recruiters. So you have a license that helps you access the entire pool of talent on the platform,
Mm.
but you can filter based on years of experience, based on specific skills, and they continue to perfect that. And now you can, for example, filter on interest, or the probability of that individual actually thinking of making a change based on certain signals that they have on the platform, like
Mm.
they start to post more or talk to people. Well, you have the open to work tag. Click search on that. So that's change on in all of the platforms that exist out there. The other thing that's continued to change is the systems that TA teams use to manage talent and candidates and the process. So the ATS, which is the applicant tracking system, used to be very structured, very rigid. So you had, your steps in the process, and you have step one, step two, step three. But as over the last few years, that's become a lot more flexible. So teams were able to design different flows for different types of positions, and then automate a lot of communications to candidates to improve the candidate experience, to measure a lot of things that we couldn't measure before, in the funnel around gender and diversity, for example. So we started using, and these ATS started integrating assessments, but you also have a lot of tools for assessment as well, right? So Test Gorilla is a tool that a lot of people know, which is for technology assessments. You send to candidates, and they do it async on their side or live with the recruiter. So a lot of these technologies have continued to improve and integrate, right? So
Right.
before you had a huge, it was micro tooling, right? You had one tool for interview scheduling, another one for assessment, another one to track your candidates. And now they started to better integrate. And so that's made the life of all the TA teams better and, improve to consider the candidate experience more. It's become a bit of, the technology has evolved to think about TA also as a sales process, right? So
Right.
now you have ATS, but you also have CRM, right, to manage the relationship with the candidates because they might not be a fit today, but when you have a market where you have gaps in supply and demand, which you do in certain industries and for certain skills, you need to continue to engage with those individuals on an ongoing basis. And so automating communications on a regular basis to tell them, what the business is doing. That was something that didn't exist maybe 5 years ago. And now it's super, I would say it's a standard, right? If you're not doing that and engaging with your candidates, then
Yeah.
you're missing out.
Interesting. Oh, super interesting. Um, so with all of these tools at your fingertips, if you will, for the scale or size of talent acquisition, has has talent acquisition as an industry itself grown? Like, I don't have the data in front of me, but like, how many candidates? I don't know. Can you say across the world or across certain countries? Like, are we talking about like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of candidates being recruited every single year?
Well, yes, it's of course in the millions. Hard to say how many. There's probably some data out there. I honestly don't have that. But it's grown. I think what's happened is, and this is unfortunate, right? There's two things that I believe have happened that talk to what you just mentioned. The first one is, we've gone, pre-pandemic, pandemic, post-pandemic, and then we've all seen the layoffs happening, and then organizations adjusting their headcount, and then suddenly growing post-pandemic, and then going down again, hiring freezes across the board. So that tension gets translated to TA teams very, very quickly, right? And so when an organization decides to stop hiring because of market uncertainty, the first team that probably gets reduced is TA, because why do you need a 50 people recruiting team when you're not hiring, right?
Right.
And so the market in that sense is very dynamic. That's number one. Number two is, there's with the ongoing evolution of technology, right? Everything that I mentioned before and a lot of other tools are meant to, on the one side, improve how organizations assess candidates, how they're able to access quickly a talent pool to fill the roles. But at the same time, a lot of that technology has been, and those capabilities have been developed to optimize how talent acquisition teams work, right? And so when a recruiter before might have been expected to manage, maybe 3 to 5 very niche, complex tech positions at any given time, now they're being asked to manage 10 because, well, they have automated communications, they have automated interview scheduling, they have online assessments, and they don't have of that anymore. And so, they're constantly being asked to do more and more um, because of the technology that they have at their disposal. And so, where you might expect that with a growing market, you need more people in talent acquisition. A lot of organizations are simply asking the same teams to do more because of the technology they have, and because a lot of organizations learn post-pandemic, post that huge growth, and after the layoffs, that not all of them, but a lot of them have learned that they can't really scale teams that quickly if there is certain level of uncertainty, and they're going to have to reduce those teams in maybe 1 year, right? And so
Right.
a lot of organizations are being more careful in how they scale their TA teams. But at the same time, the expectation is, well, you have all this technology at your disposal. You should be able to fill not 5, not 10, but 15 roles at any given point in time.
Interesting. I guess this is a sort of a natural segue into my next question, which is also a segue into what exactly you guys are doing, right? So, um, yeah, we talked a little bit before the recording. So I have my own team. There's about 12 of us, but we're global, right? So we've got people all U.S., Philippines, all Canada, all over the place. How has post-pandemic, or maybe even pre-pandemic, right? The world is now a global place. So I would assume that talent acquisition has moved from a national or a local setting to a much more global setting where you're able to tap into people, high quality talent from all across the world. And of course, that kind of segues into what you guys are doing at Atlanta Talent.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. By the way, we'll need to make sure your next hire is in Argentina.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
But yeah, no, the answer is yes, right? And I think more and more there's been I would say normalization in terms of the tools that are used in every market to access the talent pools. So before, what you had, it was you had local or maybe regional job boards, right? Monster, for example, never got to Latin America, right? Maybe
Oh, okay.
they launch in one or a couple of countries, but it's not known. If you ask someone in Argentina or in Brazil or Chile about Monster as a show board, they probably don't know it, right? But they do know Boomerang. Boomerang is a regional show board, right? And so you used to have a lot more of those local regional platforms, and now that's changed. LinkedIn has been the big disruptor many years ago. Of course, we all know where we are with LinkedIn, but many years ago, everyone started using it, and it became the number one tool. And more, there's also, even with Google, you can search for talent using Google, right? If you know how to do it with Boolean operators, which is a methodology recruiters use for talent. And so you can access the talent pool of every single country, basically. What I would say is there's nuances to understanding how to go about it, right? Because there's cultural differences and styles, of course, language barriers sometimes, right? And also understanding each market. You might, if you want to hire tech talent and you want to go to Latin America to do that, um, you're probably going to find the best talent, the most cost-effective talent, and probably if you want to do it for the US, individuals that speak English and have I would say more cultural affinity with the US, you're going to find those individuals in Argentina, in Colombia, maybe in Brazil, but you're definitely not going to find those individuals in other countries such as Peru or Ecuador, right? So understanding the markets makes a big difference, because if not, you're going to go to the wrong market, or you're just going to be looking for for talent in every single one, and that's of course not ideal from from a resourcing perspective, from a time investment perspective, right? And so pools have become more global than ever. However, understanding how to go about that, which is the right market, understanding the compensation strategy, the value proposition for individuals in one country or the other, that's going to make a huge difference in whether you're successful first hiring, that kind, and then secondly, being able to successfully sustain a collaboration with an individual in that country, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Because yeah,
Well, I think that's a really interesting point, right? So, post COVID, there's this great understanding that remote working teams can function, but how, like, there has to be like almost an entirely new knowledge set, or just an understanding of how do you have a culture, like a company culture, that's both, humanizing people, keeping people interested, while not having an office to have people in there. So is this knowledge out there? Like, are companies figuring this out, or what's your experience here?
so it's a great question. And it's exactly how you described it. There's a lot of, by the way, there's a lot of data behind this, right? So, for example, teams that have strong cultural alignment are 50% more likely to have high levels of collaboration, right? Um, there's turnover is reduced by 20% when you
Mhm.
hire someone that's the right cultural fit. And if we think about smaller businesses, if we think of, I worked at Accenture in the past, right? Of course, hundreds of thousands of people, it does make a difference. But think about your business, right? You're 10, 12,
Mhm.
20. Um, the fact that you're able to reduce turnover by 20% makes a huge difference for your
Sure,
team,
sure.
especially considering, the time you invest in training someone, in finding them, training them. And so um, it definitely makes a big difference how you design the right strategy to collaborate and to be I would say successful together, right? To be showingly successful. And so
Mm.
um, a lot of businesses don't really, especially small businesses, don't really take into this into consideration.
Mm.
They just think, well, if I hire someone, I'll tell them what they need to do, and that's that, right? I see this, for example, a lot with U.S. businesses, particularly with U.S. business, and I think there's a cultural component there, right? It's about doing, if it's about executing, it's being direct with what needs to happen, and that doesn't always work with other cultures, right? So I think that's first. That's why we're very keen, at least we as a business, to think about how individuals might be or might not be the right cultural fit for the business that we're working with, right? Uh, the other part is it takes time, right? You need to be very intentional to design the right strategies for that collaboration, that remote collaboration, to be successful. So one of the things that I typically see fail is businesses don't invest the time to plan and execute the onboarding appropriately, right? So
Right.
onboarding is a make or break when it comes to remote talent. In general, it's a make or break, right? Onboarding is going to impact your retention by between 80 to 100%, right? No matter whether you're a small business or a huge business. So
Mhm.
that's a compelling number, right? Now, especially for smaller businesses, when it's so hard to find someone and to engage with them and hire them and then train them, um, it happens a lot that there's not enough time put into planning the onboarding, and and typically what happens with small businesses, we are a startup, we are a small business as well, and we're all over the place, right? You need to do all of things all the time, basically every single thing all of the time.
Yep.
uh, Sometimes you say, well, maybe an extra conversation or explaining these things, they'll figure it out, right? That's fine. And maybe they will, maybe they won't. That's first of all. And then second, um, it's you're making a bet, right? That individual is also going to be less engaged. If you don't for them initially, it's going to take longer for them to go through their learning curve. And so onboarding is one of the things that I see typically fails and has one of the biggest impacts in terms of ensuring that the individual you hire is successful, and not only successful, but they're engaged and decide to stay longer with the company and with the business. And especially for small, SMBs, that makes a huge difference.
Yep. Yep. Um, I want to go back a little bit to Latin America. You said so Argentina, Brazil, Colombia are maybe the most relevant culture, like as far as culturally fitting for Western companies. Do you see a trend where, you mentioned Peru, I'm also assuming, Bolivia might not be as relevant, but do you see a trend where the remote working opportunities are so vast now that those countries are also starting to shift a little bit more towards, maybe they have training centers or programs or courses to make their population more relevant to working remotely and being acquired by other larger companies?
So the answer is yes, right? Slowly, but yes. So you have a couple of things that are impacting their ability to move faster. So first, Argentina, Colombia, Brazil, even Mexico, right? There's a couple of givens that might not be we might not want to take for granted for some of the other countries. So as an example, infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
We're talking, we are not having any issues with our internet connection. We did have a bit of a hiccup before we started recording, but you don't have issues with internet, right?
Sure.
It's super stable. It's not a problem, right? Maybe some parts of the country that can happen, of course, but that happens everywhere, I guess. In some other countries like Peru, Ecuador, you mentioned Bolivia as well. That's not the case, right? And so if you're going to hire someone, for example, that's going to do sales for you, if you're going to hire someone that's going to maybe do content creation or,
Mm,
run thing or marketing, whatever, recruiting, right? But what I do, you need to conduct interviews. And
mm,
if your internet connection is not stable, then, it's game over, right? It's just not going to work. The other part is that's number one, and that's infrastructure, which is very complex to address, right? Uh, the second one is language. So Argentina, Argentina actually is the country with the highest English score in Latin America.
right.
Uh, but then, Colombia, Brazil follow very, very closely. Chile as well, but in the case of Chile, the reason I typically don't mention Chile is because it's one of the more expensive countries in the region. And so when you have US businesses building teams or hiring talent in Latin America, one of the things they're looking for, which is what we offer, is it's more cost effective, right? And so
Mhm.
if you hire a developer or a designer or a copywriter in Argentina, it's going to be 40-50% lower cost than in the US. Now, if you go to Chile, that's going to be 20%, 20, 25, maybe 30, which is good, but well, that's half, right? So that's half the saving you might achieve in another country, which is definitely a high quality talent, right? So that's why I typically don't mention Chile. They don't have any issues with the infrastructure or language. There's a huge though retail industry, so and it's a smaller talent pool, so you have more challenges finding tech talent, for example. There is a lot of blue collar labor, right, and not as much white collar. Um,
Gotcha.
but I would say they're catching up, right, because there's so much opportunity. The reality is that this has been going on pre-pandemic, and then with the pandemic and post, of course, has been accelerating. But more and more businesses realize, especially smaller businesses, because companies like Accenture, where I worked, that was harder more than 15 years to create a hub in Argentina that could deliver talent that works abroad. And so bigger companies had it figured out many, many years ago, but smaller businesses are starting to realize that they can do it, especially when the pandemic hit, everyone said, well, we can do it. And if we can hire someone remote, why not hire in another region where I'm going to save 40-50% of my
Mm,
cost? Where, by the way, for startups, typically 80% of the cost they have is headcount, is people, staff. And so it makes a huge difference, right? So they are catching up. I'm seeing, I mentioned technology a lot. We could talk about other, other areas, but for technology, Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, even Venezuela, they're super cost effective. It is more difficult to find individuals that have the English skills, for example. You might be okay with the infrastructure. You have some hiccups, but you might be okay. But since they started later, what you find is they're going to be good for more junior talent, right? So they're really semi-senior developers. You can go, well, I say developers, but all areas of technology. But in Argentina or Colombia, you have super senior people that have been working with US businesses for more than 10 years, right? So that's I would say the big difference. There comes a point where um talent pools are limited, but I don't think we're at a point where we're hitting a roadblock and the demand is higher than the supply. There's huge demand, but there's definitely supply for that.
Right, right. Okay, we've mentioned COVID so many times. I'm getting flashbacks of the pandemic, and also from previous guests that I had on when we were, in the middle of the pandemic. There was so much discussion of VR and AR as not just, fun tools. I have my first VR headset behind me here, but also as tools to help remote teams collaborate. Have you have you seen any of that? I think that the discussion around it or the interest around it has decreased quite a bit, but I mean, I interviewed a couple companies that bought everybody a VR headset so that they could collaborate when everybody was working from home. Have you seen any of that happen as you're working with these remote teams?
I honestly have not. I think it was a bit of a trend, right? I
Yes.
did hear about it, and by the way, we talked a lot about it in also in the talent acquisition industry, as part of the recruiting processes, how it could
Mm,
improve the candidate experience, get them closer to individuals that were sitting somewhere else, and even I work with a company that they were using it to have individuals do tours in the office and in their customer points, right? So it was like,
mm,
we're gonna get you to go to our plant and we'll do that virtually, right?
mm.
But it was a bit of a trend, right? I always say, very nice. It was like a rainbow, right? Very nice colors, looked beautiful, but it didn't really have, or at least based on what's happened, it didn't really have the impact or the value. And from a cost perspective, of course, it's down low. And so I haven't seen that come up.
Mm.
There was a bit of a hype there a couple of years ago, like we know.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's just I've seen it reviews, right? The companies that I knew were doing it are not doing it anymore.
So yeah, it's I don't know if it's sad or disappointing. It's certainly interesting. Um, m- Maybe it's also something to do with the technology, right? Maybe the technology needs to get at another level, another stage for it to become relevant. Like I have a remote team as we talked about before the recording, and Zoom is great. We're able to communicate and, certainly building a relationship with many of the people on my team. But I'm pretty sure if we were using some sort of VR room where we could go and discuss, I'm sure it would be a little bit different. But yeah, maybe the technology is not there for this to happen for larger companies. Um, Okay, so VR and AR, we can put that to the side. Obviously, we need to talk about AI a little bit here in the later part of the episode here. How has AI been impacting your work and your industry? I think you touched a little, like there were some connection points to the improving tools and things at your fingertips, but if you could just kind of like lay that out for us, I think it'd be really interesting.
Yeah, so it's always and I feel I don't know you, I'm sure you have as well, but I think I talk about this almost every day with someone, right? It's just crazy. And every time I talk about this, when it's a broader based conversation or question like the one you made, I always think about, well, how do I go about it? Because it's just so broad, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the pretty much everywhere, right? So I think
Yeah.
the way I think about it, I try to think about it is through different stages of the talent acquisition process, right?
Okay.
So first thing is when you open a role, or a business opens a role and needs to go out to the market, right? How is AI being used? So there's a couple of ways that it's being used. First, there's tools that will go out there and do the hunting for the business, right? So you upload a job description, and the tool will go out on LinkedIn, or will look through the database of candidates or applicants and say, well, these are the 20 individuals that are a good fit for this role based on the experience and skills you need, right? So that's, especially on that initial stage, that's saving a lot of time. And that's, I think, one of the most common use cases we're seeing. Now there's also, on top of that, um, some companies, Paradox as an example, which is very, very known, that have conversational AI. And what those companies do is, they basically provide a tool that's going to do the initial screening of the individuals to assess whether they meet some basic criteria or not. Because you first look at the CV or LinkedIn profile. Does it look like a fit? Maybe yes, maybe not. And then you need to have that initial conversation to assess interest, but to maybe dig a little deeper in a couple of things, right? And so these tools like Paradox, there's a couple of ways I've seen it, right? It's conversational, could be through chat, and you have conversation where it's going to ask different questions, and based on your responses, it's going to qualify whether you meet the requirements or not. And then it can be a live conversation. So there is this tool that's really cool. It's called Converse AI, and it can basically call hundreds of candidates at the same time, and it typically has a conversation between 15 to 25 minutes, where you ask the questions based on the job description, right? Uh, I haven't used it myself. I heard, I met with those guys a few weeks ago, saw a demo. I was just blown away. So you have a lot of these technologies that are basically accelerating sort of the top of the funnel when it comes to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Like, go find the person, either within your database or outside of your database, and then do that initial screening. And then what it does is it's going to rank them. Well, this seemed like a better fit than this was. This is out of budget. This looks good. So that saves recruiters a lot of time with that initial stage. Now that's part one. Part two is when you go through the interview process, right? And so there is first technology that optimizes the process when it comes to interview scheduling, for example, right? That everything that you think about that's operational as part of the recruiting process is being automated through AI.
Mm.
Um, Before, you had some automations, Calendly, right? You could have someone self-schedule, but now you can use AI to reach out to that person and ask about their availability, turn around, look at the calendar,
Yeah.
move things around, check whether that's the best time or not, and just go ahead and schedule that directly. So it's saving a lot of time. There's other tools that, for example, MetaView, right? That's a very known tool. Those guys have been growing a lot. And what they do is it's an interview companion. So it joins the interview, it records the interview, but then it provides output from the interview based on what you heard. And it summarizes the conversation, of course. This is what you guys talked about. These are the main things that you need to consider, but this is how they fit with the show description. And this is how they compare with other candidates. And these are the 5 questions the next interviewer should probably ask this candidate, right? That's just crazy. So it supports as a companion, supports a recruiting process, it compiles the information, and it provides insights and guidance in terms of how each candidate compares to the other, and what are the things that should be assessed through the process, right? And so if you think about each stage, and there's other technologies coming out that are focusing on candidate experience, right? Supporting the candidate and answering questions through the process. What's next, and tell me about this company. And that saves time for the recruiter. They don't have to answer those questions anymore, which goes back to our conversation before. They're being asked to do more with less, right? With less in terms of more technology, more tools, but less time.
Yeah.
And so So there's been a huge change in how the industry is operating. For certain roles, like high volume roles, we see some companies that are already automating the entire process with AI, right? When you need to hire, when you do retail and you need to hire hundreds of clerks, you can run through an AI because you just need to check some basics. It's not a deep assessment, right? When you need to hire an executive, well, that's a whole different story, right? And so those processes are being supported by AI, but that place. The last thing I would say, and I will pause here, Mark, because I know I've been going for a little while now.
Fine.
The other thing that we're seeing a lot is AI driven assessments. So doing a lot more of that, which I think it's really good, right? Because at the end of the day, being able to, when you do recruiting and talent acquisition, it's never a risk-free process, right? You try to determine future performance, future potential, um, company and cultural and team fit based on maybe 3 to 6 hours of conversations, right? That's pretty challenging. Having said that, when you can use an assessment to actually see how the individual performs at certain tasks, right? It's very common for technology, the tech assessments that anyone that does development has gone through if they've ever been considered for a job at a big company, right? And so there's a lot of that going on, but not only for technology, for other areas of the business as well.
Okay, super interesting. So okay, I've got a couple ideas here, and I'm gonna try my best to get it out. From also many other conversations I'm having on those podcasts, it really seems like most industries are just being inundated with new tools, apps, support structures, all obviously, based off of AI support here. My question to you is, as this develops, as the talent acquisition process gets more and more, should we say, supported by AI, do you think that there's a risk for people applying to certain jobs to maximize their language and their profiles to an AI and not to a company? And therefore, the companies are going to be hiring not necessarily the best candidate, but the candidate who maximizes best for AI, right? I think that this is a concept that's been around in your industry a little bit.
It has, and it's super interesting. By the way, before I mention, and I like how you said supported, right? Before I mention, automated by AI, which you know, the reason I use that word is because one of the first places we're seeing the disruption of AI is more on the operational task and the
Sure, sure.
right? The optimizing how processes are executed. However, I like to think that it is an enabler, right? And so I think that's the direction. Having said that, so absolutely, and that's one of the things that I would say it's funny because today what you see a lot is candidates using AI to apply, not only improve their applications, but to apply, right? There's a lot of technology out there that enables candidates and talent to just apply to many roles without spending a single minute in front of their computer. So you have AI applications on one side, and then you have AI technology on the other side that's assessing those applications,
Sure.
right? It's basically AI talking to AI, and that's definitely happened, right? I would say I think there is a bit of a pain point on both ends, and it's that what's first, the chicken or the egg, right? So because recruiting teams are getting so many applications and such high volume of candidates, it's impossible for them to go through all of them, right?
Sure.
So with the use of AI, they can be much better at prioritizing the candidates that seem to be a better fit for the role and assessing them, and not go through the hundreds that apply. That's on one side. On the other, we're seeing that individuals apply for roles and are trying to find a new job, and they apply for tens or hundreds of roles, and they never get a single response, right? And so naturally, sometimes they decide to use AI to increase that volume because eventually they believe, well, the more I apply, the higher the chances are that I'm going to get a positive response. And so that's happening right now, a lot, unfortunately. I would say that there's probably ways that you can use AI to maximize your chances. However, I don't think it's it's something where it's a case where you're going to see individuals that use AI better to apply getting the job, as opposed to those that are a better fit, right? First of all, you still have the human intervention in the process, right? And so they're still going to be interviewed by a person. They're still going to go through assessments. What that can do maybe is open up the conversation, right? But you need to go through different stages in the process, and so unless you're the right man or woman for the show, you're not gonna get it, right? That's number one. Number two is with with technology such as the one I mentioned, which is conversational, those individuals are being assessed at the same time as, depending on the company, right? The companies that are actually using this technology, they're being assessed at the same time as others. And it's not just improving your CV, it's having the conversation and responding to those questions. And unless you decide to lie, with your experience, then it's going to be very challenging. We have seen, and it's very obvious. I've seen it a couple of months ago, and I've seen a few videos. It's actually funny when you look at them. Individuals that have interview companions, so when they're being asked
Yes.
a question by the recruiter, the AI is capturing the information and drafting the response for them, right? I even had a case myself, and it was so obvious, right? Because you could see the individual looking to the side, moving their eyes, and just reading through that, right? And so I would absolutely not recommend that. My recommendation, uh, all of this is happening though, Mark, right? I mean, to your question, is
Yeah. Yeah.
yes. I think it's hurting pretty much everyone, right? It's hurting candidates, it's hurting businesses. So my recommendation every time I talk with someone that's looking for a job or I'm being asked a question on the candidate side, how to use AI to look for a job, I would say um, use it to um, not lie but adjust your CV based on making it a better fit for the role, right? Because if you have a 10-year career, you've done a lot, right? And so
Mm.
it doesn't mean say something that's not truth. It just means, well, adjust it based on your actual experience so that it outlines and showcases the things you've done that are a better fit for the position, right? And so I think that's a good way to use AI. The other thing I would say is use it to prepare for interviews.
Yeah.
So, for example, you can easily, if you have an interview scheduled, you can go to, you know, if you like ChatGPT or Gemini, whatever tool, upload the job description, upload the information for the company, even the profile from the individual that's going to be interviewing you, and you can tell ChatGPT to act as the interviewer. Prepare you. So you ask them, prepare me for this interview, act as the interviewer, as act as Mark, and he's going to be interviewing me for a marketing manager role for Google. And this is a job description. I want to practice. So ask me the questions, take notes, tell me where I can improve, and that's a really great way to use AI to be better prepared for your recruiting process, because at the end of the day, that's not something we do on a day-to-day basis. And so even if we're great for the role, we might not be used to or comfortable with the interview, and practicing with an AI. I think that's an amazing way to use the technology for your benefit. And it's not doing something, it's not lying to anyone, it's not doing something that's inappropriate, it's just getting yourself better prepared for the conversation, right? And so those are things that I would absolutely recommend everyone. Now, to your initial question, long story short, Mark, yes, individuals can probably use AI to optimize their CV and their applications. But at the end of the day, you still have to go through the entire process, all of the stages. And at least for now, there's human involvement, right? And so you might get through the first door, but there's a couple of doors afterwards that you need to go through.
Right, right. Yeah, I think your practical advice there is not only relevant, but it touches on not the main theme, but certainly a large theme that keeps coming up in multiple podcast episodes here, and it's those people that know how to use AI going forward are they're not just going to outcompete those that don't, but they're maybe I don't have the right word here, but the people that don't use AI are just going to be completely left behind, right? So you're talking about, using it as a coach for the interview. You'd have to use your friends or your parents or, siblings or something like that to do that before. And if they're not available, you're just going to be left behind. Yeah, super interesting. I think that some of the trends that you're laying out here are very much in line with what we've heard before on the podcast. So it's great to have more reinforcement that people that come onto the podcast know what the heck they're talking about, and I think we're all kind of tied into what's actually happening on the world. It's very, very interesting.
So
I see that our time is up here, Leon. I'll have your Lana Talent website up on the show notes, as well as your own personal LinkedIn. Are there any other places that you want or that you post and publish things, and that you want audience members to go and check you out?
No, I think LinkedIn is the one place I'm super active. I actually post almost on a daily basis. I talk a lot about, talent in the region, candidate experience. I talk about AI. The things we've talked about today are the things I post about and talk about on LinkedIn. I decided to choose one social media because there's so many, it's just so difficult to keep up, that I want, what made more sense for me, which is LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So people can check me out there or go to our website, landatalent.com. They're going to find some information about our company. Let me add one thing, Mark, to your
Please.
Mark. And I think one of the ways that we're using, I personally and our business, and I see others use, AI, ChatGPT. I insist, right? I say AI because there's so many tools. You can choose the one you like the most. But one of the ways that you can use it is, if you don't know how to go about it, what you need exactly, ask it,
Mm.
right? So I mentioned an example, use it as an interview coach. Now, there might be 10 other ways you can use it to improve your chances of getting a job. Just go ahead and ask it, right? I want to apply, I want to get a job. How can you help me? I have an interview. Can you do for me, right? And so one of the things that I thought was interesting when when we had this disruption, we saw an increase in AI prompt engineer roles, right? And now, that it was crazy, right? We had a huge hype for that. And then suddenly we don't see that anymore because, well, ChatGPT can create the prompts, right? You don't need the engineer to create the prompt.
Yes.
And so one of the things I always recommend is ask how it can help you, because if you don't know it, it's going to tell you, and that's going to save you a lot of time, right? But I agree that unfortunately, it's going to create a huge disadvantage, or fortunately, it's going to create a huge advantage for those who use it, depending on how you look at it. But it's definitely going to create a gap.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree with any of those points at all. It's and I see it also in my business as well. People that join the company and they're not very familiar with AI, they lag behind really, really quickly compared to those that don't. So I think that's a very strong point to end the conversation on. So thank you so much for your time. Really interesting to hear the insights, and it's also nice to be reconnected to Latin America. As I said, I have a fond connection with Latin America. So thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Mark. It was an amazing conversation, and we'll be waiting for you in Argentina whenever you visit.
Perfect. Well, thanks again.
Sure.
Bye. Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes
or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society. They're simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard of living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.